Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're looking at something incredibly dark, something that completely rewrites how we think about human conflict. We are going to examine the absolute most one-sided, devastatingly unfair wars in history. Section 1, the collapse of the Aztecs, biological and primitive tech imbalance. Let's start by traveling back to the shores of the Americas in the early 16th century. What happened here wasn't just a military conflict, it was a sudden existential shock that wiped an entire civilization off the map.
Now, what's really interesting about this matchup is the sheer, unbelievable contrast in numbers and technology. Hernán Cortés didn't arrive on those shores with a massive, unstoppable army. He had a few hundred soldiers. Against him stood the Aztec Empire, a true superpower of millions, with incredibly advanced cities and a deeply ingrained warrior culture. But the tech imbalance was insane. The Spanish brought primitive firearms, cold steel armor, and horses. The Aztecs had literally never seen a gun in their lives, and they had definitely never seen a horse galloping at full speed. To the locals, these strange men with their roaring weapons seemed like literal gods of war. But the absolute deadliest weapon the Spanish brought with them across the ocean wasn't made of steel at all. It was an invisible weapon. The Aztecs had absolutely zero immunity to European diseases. Smallpox began to seep through their advanced city streets like a dark, suffocating mist, causing a biological terror that no amount of bravery, strategy, or warrior culture could possibly fight. Within just a few short years, this entire million-strong civilization didn't just lose a war, it suffered a total collapse. It proves a haunting point. When the technology and biological gap is wide enough, your numbers just don't matter anymore. Survival itself became mathematically impossible. A mere handful of men practically erased a sprawling empire. Section 2. The end of bravery. Industrial imbalance. Let's move to and see how this builds. Jumping forward to the late 19th century in the harsh heat of Africa for the Battle of Omdurman. This is the exact historical moment the world realized that human courage was no longer enough to win a fight. Think about the setup here. On one side, you have the Sudanese warriors, thousands of men of legendary courage, armed with traditional spears and shields, charging head-on to defend their land. On the other side, the British forces. But the British weren't relying on superior numbers or individual bravery. They were sitting firmly behind a small defensive line, operating the Industrial Revolution's deadliest new invention, the water-cooled Maxim machine gun. It was pure, raw human spirit matched against cold, calculated industrial efficiency. The terrifying result, over 10,000 dead. If you were watching a casualty counter during this battle, it would be ticking up rapidly in just a matter of hours. The slaughter was absolute. Tens of thousands of Sudanese warriors were killed on the battlefield, while British losses were almost zero. This was, quite literally, the end of bravery as a deciding factor on the battlefield. Omdurman proved that warfare had shifted forever. This wasn't a battle of wills, it was an execution by machine. The spirit of the warrior was now totally irrelevant in the face of rapid-fire, mechanized death. The industrial world had figured out exactly how to win wars without even letting the enemy get close enough to strike back. Section 3. Apocalyptic power. Zero defense. Which brings us to the mid-20th century. And I have to warn you, the concept of an unfair fight was about to reach a terrifying existential threshold. The mechanized killing of the 19th century was really just a stepping stone to apocalyptic power. Entering the atomic era during the final days of World War II, unfair fights reached a level that was downright apocalyptic. In August 1945, the United States deployed a weapon that fundamentally changed the rules of human existence: the atomic bomb. Just imagine the terrifyingly silent drop of that single bomb falling from the high-altitude clouds. And then, seconds later, an entire city is instantly erased in a blinding flash of white light. Tens of thousands of people died instantly, and those who somehow survived the initial blast faced the invisible, lingering poison of radiation. Against this kind of power, there is simply zero defense. Japan had absolutely no way to fight back against a weapon of this magnitude. This wasn't a battle of military strategies, troop formations, or supply lines. It was the dawn of a dark new era, where one single decision made thousands of miles away could end an entire population in the blink of an eye. Section 4. Technological shock. Precision imbalance.
You see, unfairness in warfare isn't always about the biggest explosion or the widest blast radius. Sometimes, as we move closer to the modern day, it's about overwhelming coordination and extreme precision.
So the crucial point here is how this shifted during the Gulf War. Think about the Iraqi military at the time. They were massive, battle-hardened from previous conflicts, genuinely one of the largest standing armies on Earth. But when the US-led coalition stepped in, the difference in air power and technology was staggering. That massive traditional army was instantly, overwhelmingly outclassed. Instead of a massive ground slog where two armies meet in the middle, we saw surgical precision, camera-guided missiles flying directly into bunker air vents, perfect, flawless coordination over the night skies. Because of this, the war was over in just a matter of weeks. It proved conclusively that in the modern age, sheer speed and advanced technology will completely beat out raw numbers every single time. Military strategists actually call this technological shock. It's the paralyzing effect of fighting a ghost army. Imagine the horrifying reality for those Iraqi soldiers. They were sitting in heavy tanks in the desert, systematically targeted and destroyed by unseen weapons dropped from jets at distances that were impossible to reach. Thousands of tanks were left abandoned, burning in the sand, without ever firing their main guns even once. Section 5. The Opium Wars. Economic strangulation. Let's step away from the battlefield for a second, because extreme imbalance isn't always driven by high explosives or lasers. Sometimes the most unfair fights in history are fought through cold, hard political and economic strangulation. Take Britain in the 19th century. A global superpower with the world's strongest navy, they systematically used their military might to force China into trade agreements that China absolutely didn't want. When China tried to resist the destruction of its society, Britain didn't even hesitate. British warships simply obliterated the smaller, wooden Chinese vessels, completely crushing their resistance just to secure a trade route. The end result was a total, humiliating defeat for China, finalized by what literally became known as the unequal treaties. These weren't peace agreements between mutual parties. They were documents designed by sheer, unbalanced power to guarantee the target nation would fail. It was raw power used to seize control of an entire nation's economy, proving that a war can be terribly unfair without ever actually seeking to conquer the land itself. Section 6. The Great Imbalance. The terrifying pattern. As we start pulling all these historical threads together, an undeniable, frankly terrifying pattern begins to emerge across all these centuries, weapons, and continents. And this brilliantly illustrates the core issue. It's always technology versus tradition, strategy versus unpreparedness, power versus vulnerability. In every single one of these historical examples, the side with the massive advantage didn't just win a local battle. They completely reshaped the global order. They literally rewrote history itself, transforming the world into their own image simply because the other side lacked the physical means to stop them. Which brings us to a chilling realization about today. The gap between the powerful and the vulnerable is growing faster than at any point in human history. Just think about the arsenal of tomorrow. We're talking cyber warfare capable of shutting down a country's entire power grid in seconds. Autonomous drones that can swarm without human pilots. AI neural networks making combat decisions faster than the human brain can even process. The next unfair war might not feature marching armies or mushroom clouds at all. It might be over before it even officially starts. History has shown us a very clear, very dark truth. When power becomes too unequal, war stops being a battle between rivals. It transforms into the total, absolute domination of the weak by the strong. And as our technology pushes further into the unknown, we really have to ask ourselves, are we prepared for a future where fighting back is no longer an option? Thank you for exploring this with me on The Explainer.